They say that before there was time, before there was dust or flame, there was only breath. Not the breath of lungs or of wind, but something deeper, a silent, endless inhale that curled through the black waters of the void, waiting to exhale the world into being. Tonight, you're not merely listening. You're drifting, floating through that breath. A weightless traveler in a cosmos unborn. There are no stars yet, no earth, no name for the sky, only an ocean without end, warm and thick like the womb of the world. The ancients called it Abzu, a place without beginning or boundary, where all things slumbered, unformed, dreaming. And in this ocean slept Tiamat, the dragon of the deep, the mother of all chaos. Her body stretched across eternity like a forgotten lullaby. She did not speak, for there was no need for words. Her heartbeat alone was enough to shake the silence. It pulsed slowly, once every 1,000 years, stirring ripples in the formless waters. And from these ripples came the whisper of thought. Thought begot sound. Sound begot name. And name is the seed of creation. In the space between Tiamat's breaths, something awoke. A flicker, a glimmer, a shimmer in the darkness, like a thought rising too quickly to be forgotten. Some call it EA. Some say it was Enki, and others believe it was simply the first idea, that from stillness there could be motion, from silence, music, from sleep, a dream. This is not history as you know it. This is memory, old as water, older than stone. The kind of truth that floats in the blood like a lullaby your ancestors once hummed in a cradle made of reeds. And as you drift deeper into the warmth of this sleep, let the breath of that first world wrap around you. There is no time here, no hurry, only a gentle exhale. The breath before time did not roar into being. It sighed, softly, lovingly, and with that sigh, the dream began. Eridu was still far away, still only a murmur beneath the water. But already, the gods were watching, and they were waiting for you. Chill, listen closely. The waters still remember. Beneath the breath, beneath the stillness, something begins to stir. The waters of the Abzu, once smooth and undisturbed like the surface of a closed eye, now ripple with purpose. Not violently, not yet, but as if a thought were forming, a memory returning from the depths. You find yourself sinking slowly through those primordial currents, not falling but descending, like a seed drawn to the warmth of the soil. And there, far below where the sunlight will one day reach, you see it, not light, not flame, but silt, golden brown, soft as velvet, moving like breath itself, carried by the slow rhythm of the underworld. This is not dirt. This is memory. The silt carries secrets. It holds the fingerprints of 1,000 beginnings. Every swirl, every grain is a story unsaid. And tonight they speak, not with words, but with whispers that glide past your ears like wind through the reeds. You hear them now, don't you? Tiny, weightless voices, older than language, yet intimate, familiar. They speak of forms beginning to rise, limbs of clay stretching toward the surface, eyes not yet open, but dreaming. Shape us, name us. We are the ones you forgot. These are the proto-beings, the half-formed, spirits of mud and divine breath, the ones who came before the gods had thrones, before kings had crowns, before cities had names. And from the silt, rising slowly, emerges the first mount, a gentle hill breaking the endless flatness of the floodplain. Some call it the primeval hill, the cosmic womb, the navel of the world where earth first touched air. This is where land was born, not with a thunderclap, but with a soft gasp, a moment of contact between water and clay. And in the center of that mound, something waits, half buried, half awake, a name carved not with tools, but with intention. Eridu, the sound of it stirs the water again. It is not just a place. It is an idea, a possibility rising from the deep. And with it comes the first blueprint. Not buildings, but a belonging. A city not yet built, but already remembered. Not by the gods, but by the earth. You feel it beneath your fingertips as you drift closer. The soft vibration of clay preparing to harden, as if bracing for the weight of temples and prayers. The silt folds around you like a cradle now. You're not watching history. You are part of it, suspended in a moment when the world had not yet decided what to become. Above you, the waters begin to thin. A light, faint and bluish, bleeds through the rippling ceiling. The breath of the world is rising, ready to become voice. But here, in the hush before form, the whispers still call to you. They remind you that every beginning is born from the forgotten, that every temple stands on bones, and that even gods rise from mud. Let the silt hold you a little longer. Let the water sing. There is more to remember, and the city is still waiting. It begins not with stone, but with silence. A silence so ancient it hums, so vast it feels alive. Out of the soft breath and fertile silt, something rises, not a building, not a wall, but an intention, a will pressing upward from the soul of the earth, as if the world itself were dreaming of structure. And in that dream, a name is whispered once more. Eridu, some say was the first city. Others say it was the first memory of a city, etched into the stars before being built in clay. A blueprint not drawn by human hands, but by celestial patterns, the kind that flicker just beyond our reach when we close our eyes at night. Eridu did not burst forth. It emerged slowly, like morning light bleeding into the folds of a dark sky. A gentle birth, a sacred unfolding. Here, in the southern cradle of what we now call Mesopotamia, by the banks of the Euphrates, where the marshes sighed and the water glistened like obsidian in the moonlight. The first city kissed the edge of the known world. But this was no ordinary city. It was designed to be a mirror, not of man, but of the heavens. Every angle, every courtyard, every layer of brick reflected a longing to touch the divine. It was as if humanity, newly awakened, reached not outward, but upward. The city's heart was not its gates or its markets, but a temple, a raised platform, humble and sacred, where gods could descend and men could look up and feel seen. Iabzu, they called it, the house of the deep waters, built for Enki, the god of wisdom, water, magic, and mischief. Here, the divine was not a distant thunderbolt, but a flowing, laughing presence. A ripple in the stream, a song in the reeds, a voice in the well. Enki walked among the people, or so the elders said. He didn't thunder. He whispered. He didn't demand sacrifice. He gave secrets. He taught how to mold clay, how to make fire kind, how to speak to animals with one's eyes. And in return, the people built Eridu, not for themselves, but for him. Every wall was a hymn. Every roof a prayer. The city breathed holiness, not because it was forced to, but because it couldn't help it. By day, Eridu shimmered beneath the Mesopotamian sun, its bricks the color of warm sand, its streets alive with movement, but never haste. By night, it glittered like a reflection of the constellations. Its ziggurat, small by later standards, rose like a soft voice toward the stars. The people believed that by climbing it, they drew closer to the gods. But perhaps it was the gods who built it to climb down. And all around the land listened. The reeds swayed in rhythms known only to the wind. The fish darted through sacred canals as if obeying unseen choreography. The palms whispered stories to the moon. Children played where rituals were held. Women drew water from wells whose depths touched myth. And in the early hours of morning, just as the mist lifted from the marshes, priests would place tiny offerings, bowls of honey, milk, and oil on altars not for show, but because it felt right. They did not fear their gods. They revered them like one reveres the tide. Gentle, necessary, and capable of disappearing without warning. And above it all, the city pulsed with something no archaeologist can name. Not progress, not conquest, but a sense of belonging. To the earth, to the water, to the stars, to the self. Eridu was not the largest city, nor the most ornate, but it was first. And there's a kind of sacred loneliness in being first, like the first heartbeat in a womb, or the first hair before grief takes form. It set the rhythm for all that would follow. Uruk, Uar, Babylon, they danced to the memory of Eridu, even as they forgot her name. But we have not forgotten. Not tonight. In this quiet moment, under this dreaming sky, we remember the city of first light. And in doing so, perhaps, she remembers us. The city had risen. The clay had hardened. And now, the god began to stir. In Eridu, he was not worshipped from afar. He lived there, not in thunder or terror, not in flame or fear, but in something gentler, something ancient as memory and playful as rain. They called him Enki, though his name, like water, changed shape as it moved. E to some, new to mud to others, but always the same essence. The god of deep wisdom and fresh water. The trickster, the teacher, the one who smiles even as he creates storms. He did not wear a crown. He wore currents, robes spun from flowing streams and river mist. His voice a ripple, his laughter a cascade, and he walked, not upon the streets, but beneath them. Below the ziggurat, beneath the city's bones, flowed the Abzu, the freshwater abyss, the sacred reservoir where creation began. While other gods ruled from high places, Enki ruled from below, from cool chambers lit with bioluminescent moss and walls that shimmered with wet reflections. Here he stored the me, mystical tablets, etched with the very building blocks of life. Not laws, but possibilities. Art, song, love, judgment, joy, even sorrow. Each one a sacred code, pulsing softly in the dark, as if breathing. They say Enki swam among them, running his fingers across the glowing glyphs like a harpist tuning his strings. He would hum to them sometimes, and when he did, springs would burst from the dry earth above, as if the world itself wanted to sing along. To the people of Eridu, he was not distant. He was present. His presence was the cool touch of well water at dawn, the sudden inspiration in a sculptor's hand, the quiet solution to a riddle spoken in a dream. Children were told to whisper their wishes into river stones and toss them into the canal, not because they expected answers, but because they trusted him to listen. Fishermen swore they saw him at dusk, his silver hair flowing with the current, his eyes gleaming like obsidian marbles just beneath the surface. He would vanish the moment they looked directly at him, but their nets always came back full, not as reward, but as conversation. Even the priests, draped in reeds and resins, knew better than to speak of him with too much certainty. They poured libations with heads bowed, not out of fear, but out of respect for mystery, because Enki was not a god of war, not a builder of empires. He was the god of what could be, of imagination, of inner silence, of the moment before a choice. One legend tells of the time a young woman, mourning the loss of her child, fell asleep beside the temple fountain. That night, Enki came to her not in splendor, but as a soft drizzle. When she awoke, her eyes were dry, not because she had forgotten, but because she had understood. In his realm, understanding did not roar. It whispered, and the city, shaped by his presence, became a place of balance. Water did not flood, but nurtured. Laws were not carved in stone, but lived in daily rituals. The way a neighbor handed you bread, or how a mother taught her child to hum the name of the river before bathing. And yet, there was always something unsettling about Enki. Not in malice, but in depth. He knew too much, saw too far, held secrets that could unravel the very fabric of being. He gave generously, but never all, because even in paradise, mystery must be preserved. And so Enki walked the waters of Eridu, not above them, not separate from them, but within, always within. If you stood near the edge of the sacred canal at twilight, and the light bent just so, you might glimpse a ripple that moved against the current, a sign he was near, or maybe it was just your own reflection, smiling back. Even now, beneath the cracked soil and broken bricks, the waters still remember. They remember his steps, his sighs, his laughter like distant thunder. Close your eyes. The reeds are rustling again. The water is cool, and somewhere far below, a god is still walking. They say that if you climbed to the top of the ziggurat at Eridu and stood there in the hush of night with your hand over your heart, you could feel the stars breathing. Not in the way modern stars twinkle, distant, cold, mathematical, but in the way fireflies pulse in a quiet field, or how a candle flickers when someone enters the room. Alive, personal, watching. The ziggurat was not large by today's scale. It was no towering wonder like those later built in Uar or Babylon, but size was never its purpose. It did not rise to dominate. It rose to connect, to tether heaven and earth, to bridge flesh and spirit, to turn the cosmos into something you could climb one humble step at a time, built layer by layer from sun-dried bricks, each one pressed by hand, its foundation laying not only in clay, but in reverence. Its base rested on the navel of the world, that ancient mound where land first rose from the sea. And as the people added each tier, they didn't just build upward, they built inward. Each ascent was a prayer, each stone a syllable in a language lost to time. And what language it must have been. There are those who believe the ziggurat was aligned to the stars, that its corners echoed the sacred cardinal points, that its summit mirrored the arc of constellations long faded from modern memory. The Sumerians saw in the sky not distance, but story. They read stars the way we read faces, with longing, with awe, with a strange and tender familiarity. The ziggurat of Eridu, then, was less a tower and more mirror, catching starlight and folding it inward, into the deep bones of the city, into the dreams of its people. Some nights, when the air was perfectly still and the desert's breath lay quiet, the ziggurat would hum. Not a sound exactly, but a vibration, a kind of remembering. Elders said it was the gods stirring in their sleep, calling back the echoes of when they still walked among men. Others whispered that it was the stars themselves speaking, telling secrets to the stone. And the children? They didn't care for such explanations. They only knew that climbing the steps at dusk made their hearts race, as if they were ascending into something vast and loving, like being lifted into the arms of a parent long gone. There are carvings, now weathered, at the foot of the structure. Spirals, eyes, reeds, serpents. No one fully agrees on what they mean. But perhaps that's the point. Meaning was never rigid here. It was fluid, a dance between silence and interpretation, between presence and possibility. On the summit, priests once stood beneath moon and star, offering oil and incense, not to demand favor, but to acknowledge awe, They spoke to the stars as if speaking to old friends. And in return, the skies seemed to lean in. The stars of Eridu were not remote. They were remembering. They carried the weight of ancestors and the hopes of unborn children. Each one a pinprick in the veil, a reminder that above us stretches not just space, but memory, desire, longing. And though the ziggurat has long since crumbled, its bricks scattered and buried beneath centuries of silence, the shape still lingers in the earth, and more importantly, in us, because somewhere deep inside, we all carry the same impulse, to build toward light, to seek meaning in the stars, to climb, to ask, to hope that someone, something, might answer from above. So rest your head and imagine the night, wind brushing your skin atop the sacred height. The sky is so close here, almost warm, almost whispering, and as your eyes drift closed, know this, even if the stars have changed, even if the ziggurat has fallen, the connection remains. We are still climbing, still listening, still dreaming of forgotten stars. The ancients believed that memory was not something hidden in the mind, but held in the hands, and so they pressed their stories into the earth, not to preserve them, but to breathe them into being. In Eridu, they use clay, not as we use paper for convenience, but as if it were sacred flesh, the skin of the earth, still warm from creation. It was soft at first, supple, humble. They shaped it with fingers wet from the Euphrates, thumbprints still visible in tablets that now sleep behind museum glass. They did not see themselves as authors. They were participants in a dialogue with the divine. Each mark was a syllable in a language gifted by the gods. Each wedge, a breath from beyond the veil. Cuneiform, they called it. The wedge-shaped script that looked like tiny bird tracks across the surface. But to the people of Eridu, these were not marks. They were echoes, codes, songs, and the clay remembered. It remembered the names of kings and the weight of floods. It remembered omens drawn from the liver of a sheep. It remembered the birth of a child, the death of a farmer, the hymn of a priestess sung to the morning star. Thousands of tablets lay buried beneath the city even now, mute archives of a civilization that did not scream, but whispered its truth to the earth. Some tablets held lists, grain, goats, labors. Simple records, we might say, but these lists were sacred inventories, not of wealth, but of relationship. Each goat was a life, each laborer a soul with a family, a place. The act of writing them was an act of acknowledgement, a way to say, I see you, I remember you, you were here, and then there were the myths. Oh, the myths! On those same tablets, inscribed with fingers calloused by reed styluses, were the great cosmic dramas, of gods torn by jealousy, of waters rising to reclaim what once was theirs, of sacred trees and serpent winds. Here we find the tale of Inanna's descent, the goddess who dared to descend into the underworld, stripped of her power, her clothing, her pride, only to rise again. Or the story of the me, the divine blueprints of existence, bestowed upon humanity by Enki himself, then lost, then stolen, then returned. Each myth written not just for amusement, but for remembering. Because what is myth, if not truth preserved in poetry? And what is clay, if not a place where breath becomes eternal? Archaeologists, centuries later, would lift these tablets from the soil with trembling fingers, dust caked into their edges, their markings worn like scars. They would study them, translate them, catalog them, but no microscope can see what the heart feels. When holding the words of a hand that vanished 5,000 years ago, imagine it now, a tablet still warm from the kiln, its script glistening with fresh meaning. A father pressing his son's name into the clay. A priest writing a prayer for rain. A young girl laughing as she tries to write the name of her lover into something that might outlast them both. And here you are, thousands of years later, listening. You're not separate from them. You are part of the chain. For every word spoken tonight is a ripple from that first press of a reed into clay. Even now, the dust around Eridu sighs with memory. Even now, beneath cracked soil and fractured bricks, the clay remembers. And if you were to touch it, if you pressed your fingertips gently into the silence, you might feel it answer. Because somewhere in that sacred soil, your name, your story, may already be written, not in ink, but in something far older and far more patient. Sleep now. Let the ancient clay hold your name for a while. It will not forget you. Not all stories begin in temples. Some are born in the stillness between footsteps, in the rhythm of hooves over dust, in the way one soul, humble and earthbound, looks up and dares to fall in love with the heavens. They tell the tale in soft voices. Even now, though Eridu is silent, of a shepherd whose name is lost, and of a woman from the sky, whose name still dances in the constellations. By day, the shepherd walked alone, his flock grazing in the reeds near the city's edge, where the horizon stretches like a promise, and the river hums a song no one truly understands. He was not a priest, not a builder, not a scribe. He was simply a man who listened to the wind, to the animals, to the language of silence. One night, when a marsh mist glowed blue under the full moon, he saw her. She stood above the river, not on it, but above, barefoot on nothing, her hair flowing behind her like strands of starlight, drawn down from the sky. She was not of this earth, not entirely, but neither was she unfamiliar. He knew her the way we know a melody we've never heard before, or a face from a dream. She did not speak with words, but with stillness, and yet the shepherd understood. She was lost, or perhaps she had chosen to descend. They met there night after night, not lovers at first, but mirrors. He taught her the names of the reeds, of the birds that sang at dawn, of the way the stars looked reflected in the river's skin. And she taught him how to listen to silence without needing to fill it. She showed him constellations that had no names, shapes only visible to those who remembered what the sky looked like before time began. He wove for her a cloak of wool, dyed with clay and ash, so that the people would not stare. She wore it like armor, laughing, a sound like silver rain on bronze rooftops. Some say she was Inanna herself, the star goddess in one of her many forms, descending not out of curiosity, but out of longing to remember what it felt like to be touched. Others believe she was not a goddess at all, but being older than gods, one of the first sparks from the great breath, testing the world of matter to see if it could still hold grace. Either way, the city noticed Eridu, for all its majesty, was a place of order, of temples and rites, of hierarchies and lines drawn in both sand and belief. The idea of a sky woman walking with a shepherd troubled the priests. They feared imbalance. They feared what could not be named or explained. And so, a choice was given. She must climb the ziggurat and offer herself to the gods, or return to the stars and never walk the earth again. The shepherd begged. He knelt before the high priest, offering all he had, his sheep, his home, even his name. But the gods, it was said, must be obeyed. So, on the 7th moon of the 9th month, she climbed the steps in silence, each tear a farewell, each breath a prayer. At the top, she turned to look at the shepherd one last time. He was in the crowd, but she saw only him, and then she vanished. Some say she ascended in light. Others say she leapt and became star. But the shepherd, they say, waited by the river every night until the end of his days. And when he died, his body was buried not in the city, but in the reeds where they had first met. Over time, a flower began to grow there, pale blue, scentless, blooming only at night. The people called it Shamadi, she who listens, and the priests, in secret, began to leave offerings there, for even they came to understand. Not all holiness descends in flame. Some falls gently, wrapped in silence and stars, and stays just long enough to remind us that love itself is divine. Sleep now. She walks again tonight, somewhere beyond the veil. And if your heart is quiet, if your breath is soft, you may feel her draw near, the sky woman, the shepherd, and the love that dared to touch the sacred. In Eridu, not all rivers were of water. Some were carved from memory, others from myth, and a few from dreams so deep they flowed beneath waking life like veins beneath skin. They were called the 9 rivers, and though no map will ever show them, the people of Eridu knew them well, not by sight, but by feeling. Each river, they said, belonged to a different part of the soul. Each flowed from the Abzu, but took its own winding course through the unseen realms, weaving through sleep, looping around thought, dripping slowly through the cracks of the world. The first was the river of birth. Warm and slow, it curled like a cradle around the unborn, whispering to them the names they would forget the moment they were born. To dream of this river was to wake in tears, unsure why your chest ached, as if you'd lost something precious and ancient. The second was the river of joy. Its waters bubbled with laughter that had not yet been heard. Drinking from it brought visions of childhoods not your own. A sunlit courtyard, a game in the dust, a mother's humming drifting through woven doors. The third, the river of pain, was sharp and clear, like glass melted into water. It showed not only your sorrows, but those you had caused. It forgave nothing, but offered understanding. The fourth was the river of return, a looping, eternal stream that brought wanderers back to the beginning, again and again. To dream of this river was to walk old roads with new feet, to see that nothing is truly over, only changed. The fifth was the river of forgetting, silken and quiet. It washed names from memory, faces from the mind, shadows from the heart. The priests warned of this one, for to forget without healing was to die before your time. The sixth, the river of fireflies, glowed with drifting sparks that hummed lullabies in lost languages. Its current was said to carry the dreams of children before they slept. A river of wonder where no fear could survive. The seventh, the river of the ancestors, was thick and slow, its surface etched with the faces of the dead. To kneel beside it in a dream was to feel a hand on your shoulder, a voice in your ear saying, "We are still with you." The eighth, the river of the moon, rose only at night. It carried reflections rather than water, moments you'd almost lived, choices you almost made, lives that branched off from your own like silver threads. And the ninth, the last, was the river of truth. No one dared speak of it aloud. It was said to be invisible, not because it was hidden, but because truth itself is not seen, only felt. Those who touched it returned forever changed. Some never spoke again. Others wrote poems in the dust with shaking fingers. A few simply walked into the desert and never returned. In the center of Eridu, just beside the temple of Enki, there was a basin carved from polished black stone. It was called Namu's Eye, and it held no water, only a stillness so perfect, so deep, that to gaze into it too long was to feel the 9 rivers stir within you. Pilgrims came from distant cities. They bathed their hands in the air above it, hoping to feel a ripple of dream, a shimmer of one of the sacred currents. The priests never touched it. They only guarded it, Not from thieves, but from questions that should not be asked too quickly. Because the 9 rivers were not for answers. They were for remembering what the soul already knew. Sometimes, in the middle of the night, you would hear someone cry out in their sleep. A name, a place, a fragment of a song. And those who heard would smile sadly and say, "The rivers are flowing through them tonight." Even now, when the winds sweep across the ruins, there are places where the sand moves like water, where footsteps leave no mark, but dreams remain. If you find yourself thirsty in your sleep, not for water, but for meaning, pause, listen. There may be a river running just beneath your skin, a dream rising like mist through the cracks of your heart. Let it carry you. Let it whisper. The 9 rivers still flow, and they remember your name. In Eridu, dusk was not simply the end of day. It was a passage, a breath held between worlds, a delicate threshold where the divine and the mortal touched, if only for a moment, through shadow and stillness. And at that hour, when the sun bled gold into the horizon, and the reeds stood like silent sentinels, the temples began to weep. The people swore they saw it. Beads of water, not rain, not dew, but something more intimate, emerging from the sacred walls like tears from skin. Slow, deliberate, mourning, or remembering. They said it happened when the light hit just right, when the ziggurat stones turned amber, when the wind quieted, and the city itself seemed to listen. The temples of Eridu were built not for spectacle, but for conversation, with stars, with soil, with what cannot be named. Each wall held stories in silence, each column wrapped in woven shadows, each altar stained not with blood, but with longing. And in this hushed hour, as twilight peeled the sky open, those temples softened, not structurally, but emotionally, like old souls releasing secrets they had carried too long. The House of Deep Waters, Enki's temple, was especially known for its weeping. Its inner chamber, cool and dark as the riverbed, held a basin of water fed not by pipe or spring, but by presence. No one knew how it stayed full. No one questioned it. It simply was a mirror within the heart of the city, reflecting not your face, but your essence. At dusk, the priests would descend into the chamber barefoot, carrying no flame. They moved slowly, as if the air itself were sacred, as if too sharp a step might fracture the thin barrier between realms. They carried small bowls carved from alabaster, each one etched with symbols so old they had no spoken name. And with these bowls, they collected the tears from the temple's walls. Not many, just a few drops. It was enough. They would mix the tears with crushed lapis, with ash from sacred fires, and with petals from the rare white lotus that bloomed only near the water's edge. This mixture was called Namter's breath. It was not medicine, not magic. It was memory in liquid form. To drink it was to see yourself, not as you are, but as the gods once dreamed you could be. But these rituals were not performed for crowds. There were no proclamations, no trumpets, no spectacle. The city respected the silence of dusk. Children were taught to lower their voices. Vendors closed their stalls not with annoyance, but with reverence. Lamps were lit slowly, not to push away the dark, but to welcome it like an honored guest. And as the last sunlight clung to the top of the ziggurat, casting long shadows across the courtyard, those who still believed would gather quietly. They would stand outside the temples, hand-clasped, not to pray, but to listen. Because if you were still enough, if you emptied your thoughts like a jar turned over, you could hear them, the stones sighing, the pillars exhaling, the gods grieving. But for what? Some said the temples wept for the past, for a time when the world was whole, when gods walked without masks, and humans still remembered the language of light. Others believed the temples mourned us for our forgetfulness, for how quickly we turned sacred into structure, ritual into routine. But a few, those with eyes that saw between, claimed the temples wept not from sorrow, but from love, because what else could explain why the divine would stay, even after we stopped looking? Even now, when the ruins of Eridu sleep beneath wind and dust, when its once mighty walls are little more than bruises on the earth. Some travelers say the stones still hold moisture at dusk, that the air becomes heavier, that the silence deepens, like a breath about to speak. Perhaps it is memory. Perhaps it is only the shifting of the air. Or perhaps the temples are still waiting, still watching, still weeping for a world that once listened. And tonight, if only in this dream, you are standing there again, beneath the fading sky, breathing the warmth of the sacred, hearing the stones' soft tears fall one by one into the basin of eternity. Let your heart grow quiet. Let the dust take you. The temples are weeping, but you're not alone. By day, Eridu was serene. Children played between the canals. Merchants traded baskets of dates and figs. Fishermen untangled their nets, singing old songs to the river. But beneath this tranquility, beneath the songs and incense, there coiled something older, something that moved silently beneath the surface of devotion. They were not feared, they were revered. The serpents, not the slithering beasts of later myth, not symbols of evil or punishment. No, in Eridu, serpents were sacred. They were memory given form, spirals of ancient wisdom that had no beginning and no end. The priests of Eridu walked with them, lived with them, dreamed with them, in a house of deep waters. Beneath the ziggurat, a hidden chamber existed, cool, dim, breathing softly through cracks in the earth. There, nestled in stone bowls filled with river moss and warm clay, the sacred serpents of Enki dwelled. Their scales shimmered not with color, but with time, a dull luster like starlight trapped in skin. They were fed not with meat, but with silence, with presence. The priests believed these serpents carried the weight of forgotten knowledge, not as words, but as patterns, movements, coils, shedding skins of truth that had long since faded from human tongues. Each morning, as the sun crept over the marshlands, a ritual unfolded. The Enudum, high priest of the temple, would descend into the chamber barefoot and bare-chested, his body dusted with ash and honey. He would sit in stillness among the serpents, surrounded by coiled bodies that did not hiss, did not strike, but watched him, with eyes older than the moon. Then the chants would begin, low, monotonous, vibrating the stone walls, not to summon power, but to align with it. It was said that during these moments, the boundary between body and God dissolved, that Enki himself, Lord of fresh water and deep truths, spoke through the serpents, not in commands, but in images, flashes of the hidden structure behind all things. One priest recorded a vision in a clay tablet now lost to time. The snake unraveled before me, and I saw the city coiled within its spine, each house a scale, each soul a breath in its eternal shed. We are not building Eridu. We are only remembering it. To the people of the city, the priests were more than guardians of ritual. They were weavers. They connected heaven to earth, water to sky, man to spirit. And the serpent always moved between. Coiled motifs adorned the walls. Bracelets in a market mimicked the spiral. Even bread was baked in circular patterns, a quiet homage to that which curves rather than cuts. And yet, for all their reverence, there was caution too, because the serpent does not give knowledge freely. It tests, it watches, it waits, There were whispered stories of those who entered the chamber with arrogance, seeking power rather than wisdom. They emerged shaken, mouths silent, eyes too wide, unable to sleep beneath the open sky again. The priest said it was not punishment. It was simply truth, delivered too quickly, because truth in Eridu was not linear. It did not walk. It coiled. The great paradox of the serpent was this, that it shed its skin and yet remained itself. It died and was reborn again and again, without ever truly changing. And so did Eridu. The city's rituals spiraled through time. Familiar, sacred, repeated, not to keep things still, but to honor the rhythm of transformation. Even now, among the ruins, fragments of serpent-shaped amulets can still be found, worn smooth by time, yet unmistakable. They rest in museum drawers, untouched, unseen, but they remember. And sometimes, when no one is watching, the dust around them shifts, as if something once coiled has stirred just slightly. So now, as you drift into sleep, feel the ancient spiral turning in your own chest. The breath in, the breath out, the old skin falling away, the new one forming, quiet and unseen. The serpents of Eridu still move, still whisper, still wait, and the priest within you, the part that listens, is ready to enter the chamber. Eridu was a city of peace, but not all peace is eternal, not even among gods. In the early days, when clay was still damp with creation and the stars had just begun to settle into their patterns, Eridu stood serene beneath the heavens. Blessed, balanced, beloved, the cradle of kingship, the heart of Enki's wisdom, the place where humans and gods met in whispers rather than war. But nothing stings the divine quite like being forgotten. And nothing wounds pride like watching another god's city rise first, far above Eridu's silent ziggurat, in the unseen heights of the heavens. Other gods watched, not with malice at first, but with curiosity, then confusion, then bitterness. Why him? Why here? Enlil, lord of wind and authority, looked down from his high dwelling in Nippur, where his voice had once carved thunder through the void. Now only Enki's rivers sang. Enlil, stern, regal, unbending, was not a god who wept. He governed law, order. He assigned duties, crowned kings, drew borders in starlight. To him, Enki's city was soft, too fluid, too forgiving. Where was discipline? Where was reverence? He began to speak in meetings held behind celestial veils, not loudly, but with cold precision. Wisdom without command becomes chaos, he said. Water without banks will drown the world. In a mortal realm, these murmurings began to stir the priesthoods. The high priests of Enlil, clad in dark linen and obsidian rings, arrived at Eridu under the guise of diplomacy. They came with gifts, scrolls, silver, ceremonial blades. But their eyes wandered through the city like shadows looking for cracks. And there were cracks. Small, human ones. A dispute between river clans. A shortage of fish. A strange illness among the date palms. The kind of things that happen in any city, but which can be turned, twisted, made useful. Soon, rumors began to slip through the streets like wind under a tent flap. That Enki had grown indulgent. That his love of knowledge had made him careless. That the me, the divine laws, were being hoarded, not shared. Some whispered that the rivers were rising too often now. That the floods were not accidents, but warnings. That perhaps another god should govern the waters. And in the heavens, the whispering grew louder. Inanna, goddess of war and love, heard them too. She, born of power and beauty, with eyes like twin flames and a will that bent empires. She had once admired Enki, had danced in his temples, flirted in riddles, stolen a me or two from his table in a drunken night of laughter. But admiration can sour, especially when the world praises another's wisdom more than your strength. It is said that Inanna stood at the edge of the sky one night, watching Eridu glow with firelight and water reflections, and she whispered, "Let's see how well he swims when the tide turns." And so, the balance began to shift. Dreams in Eridu grew restless. Children woke crying for no reason. Animals grew quiet at dusk. The priests cast omens, liver readings, star patterns, oil and water. And the signs were muddled, spiraling, broken. Enki knew. Of course he knew. He felt the shift in the rivers, the weight in the air. But he did not act with fire. He never did. He walked to the edge of the sacred canal one dusk, alone, his reflection rippling in the current. And he said aloud to no one and everyone, "So it begins." The gods had grown jealous of wisdom, of stillness, of a city that needed no conquest to feel divine. And when gods grow jealous, they do not strike with swords. They strike with imbalance, with silence that arrives too soon, with floods that forget when to recede, with winds that howl questions no oracle can answer. Even now, the ruins remember that shift, not as a single event, but as a slow, encroaching shadow, like dusk that forgets to end, like music played slightly off-key, like the feeling of being watched, but never knowing from where. Sleep gently tonight. The gods are still watching, and some wounds, even divine ones, never truly fade. There are some stories that live not in stone or song, but in the hush between waves, in a way water folds over itself, carrying secrets too heavy for the air. This is one such story. It was never written in clay, never carved into a ziggurat wall, and yet the elders whispered of it around fire pits, when the night grew thick and the Euphrates moved with unnatural silence. They said there was once a pact, forged not in temples, but beneath them, not between kings or priests, but between the deep and those who dared to listen. The Euphrates, even now, is a river of memory. But back then, it was alive with presence. It was not a thing to be crossed, but a god to be approached. Its banks pulsed with more than water, with awareness, with breath, with choice. One moonless night, long before Eridu's decline, when the stars were veiled and the wind refused to speak, the river rose, not as flood, not as punishment, but as invitation. The priests of Enki, sensing a trembling in the waters, descended into the lower sanctum, the hidden chambers beneath the temple, built closer to the Abzu, where earth and water touched in ways few could bear. There, deep below the city, was the stone of listening, a black, flat slab, smooth as still water, cold to the touch, but pulsing faintly, like a heartbeat slowed by centuries. The priests laid their palms upon it, and the river answered, not in words, but in visions. They saw cities swallowed by silence, children born with eyes that reflected the sky, waters that healed, waters that hungered, a future bent and broken by fire, by forgetting. And in the midst of this flood of images, a voice not loud, not soft, but ancient, it offered them a pact, not for power, not for immortality, but for knowledge, the kind that doesn't illuminate, but dissolves, the kind that strips you bare, leaving only what truly is. The Euphrates, it seemed, was not merely a river. It was a threshold, a boundary between what we see and what sees us. And the pact was this: to be guardians of that boundary, to never let the world forget. That water remembers, that beneath every ritual, every offering, every holy word, there lies something older, something waiting. In return, the city would flourish, but only as long as it listened. And for a time, Eridu did. Its wells ran pure. Its fields ripened. Its dreams came easily, like birds to open hands. But pacts are fragile things, not because they are weak, but because they require attention. As the generations passed, and temples grew higher, and prayers became performance, the listening faded. The stillness was replaced by structure. The river began to murmur warnings. Strange tides, sick fish, shadows in the reeds. The priests ignored it, or perhaps they simply forgot how to hear. Only the oldest among them remembered, old men with milky eyes, who sat beside the water and hummed to stones. They would say, "The pact still stands, but we no longer face the river. We turn our backs to it now." And in the deep, beneath the city, the stone of listening pulsed more slowly, its rhythm fading, its patience thinning. Some say the pact was never broken, only neglected, and that the river still waits, still listens, still dreams. Others believe the river took back what it gave, that when Eridu's walls finally crumbled, it wasn't conquest or time that undid them, but a gentle, deliberate withdrawal. The water simply turned away. Tonight, if you sleep near running water, you may feel something stir beside you. Not threat, not danger, but the memory of a promise. Old as the earth, deep as the silence beneath the waves. The Euphrates is not forgotten. And if you are quiet, truly quiet, you may still hear the terms of the pact, whispered just below the current. Long before Eridu fell, before the gods turned their faces and the water pulled away, there were children born in the city who were not entirely of this world. They came from wombs of women and the prayers of priests, but also from the breath of gods and the weight of sacred fire. They were known not by title or lineage, but by the way the air shifted when they entered a room, by the strange, still heat that followed them, a warmth not of sun or hearth, but of origin. The elders called them the children of clay and flame, not because they were different in body, but because something in them remembered what the rest of the world had begun to forget. They walked with the calm of those who belong to two realms, feet planted in dust, but eyes fixed always on something just out of reach. Their presence was subtle, but undeniable. When they touched clay, it hardened faster. When they wept, the ground absorbed their tears as though tasting something long lost. And when they laughed, the wind paused to listen. These children were born of a threshold, of the delicate, dangerous balance between knowledge and mystery, between the comfort of tradition and the fire of divine insight. They were raised with lullabies that were once prayers, with stories that were once truths. And in the space between those things, something began to awaken. By the time they were old enough to speak, they had already seen too much, not with their eyes, but in dreams, visions, passed like river currents through their veins, of ziggurats crumbling into silence, of temples dissolving into dust, of gods walking into the dark with no intention of returning. One child, barely 5, stood at the edge of the Euphrates and whispered, "It is leaving." When asked what she meant, she simply touched the water and said, "All of it." The priests noticed, at first with awe, then with concern, because the children of clay and flame did not obey rules as others did. They questioned, they wandered, they listened in a way that made others uncomfortable, not to what was said, but to what was hidden. They would go into the sacred chambers uninvited, and emerge hours later, silent but glowing. They traced forbidden symbols in the dust, as if recalling them from lives never lived. They played with serpents as if with pets, and sometimes murmured words that made the creatures bow their heads. Enki, they said, had marked them, not with power, but with remembrance. Some priests believed these children were a blessing, the future of Eridu, the next guardians of the me. Others, more fearful, saw them as signs of imbalance, beings too close to the divine, too full of flame, because fire, after all, does not simply illuminate, it consumes. As the children grew, so did their intensity. Their dreams became longer, deeper, shared. They began to gather at night, in forgotten courtyards and under fig trees, sitting in circles, hands joined, not speaking, just listening. One night, the sky turned red, not with storm, but with a strange, gentle light. The elders said it was an omen. The children said it was an invitation. That night, they disappeared. Some claimed they walked into the desert and were swallowed by the stars. Others believed they returned to the Abzu, to the waters below, to live among the forgotten gods. A few whispered that they never truly left, that they became the fire that would one day rise. When the world was ready to listen again, in the years that followed, the city changed. The water grew unpredictable. The stones felt heavier. The priests grew quieter, because something had shifted. Something precious was gone. Not a child, not a group, but a connection. The soft thread between the divine and the human had thinned, and without it, the city felt colder, even beneath the burning sun. Even now, when wind drifts through the ruins, there are places where the heat lingers, where for a moment, you feel as though something ancient just passed by. A warmth not of fire, but of presence. Perhaps they are still here, the children of clay and flame, watching, waiting, not to return, but to remind us of what we once were and what we may yet become. So close your eyes now. Feel the soft heat at your fingertips. It is not your blanket. It is memory, and it burns, not to harm, but to wake. Before the maps were drawn, before cities claimed names or borders, there were places that simply resonated. Eridu was one of them, not because of its bricks, not because of its kings, but because it echoed the stars, not in imitation, but in response. You see, the people of Eridu did not study the sky the way we do today, with telescopes or theories, but with devotion. They watched not to measure, but to understand, not to own the stars, but to hear them. Each constellation was not just a grouping of light, but a being, a story, a breath that moved above and within them. At night, when a heat had fallen from the earth, and the winds cooled the clay rooftops, families would climb and lie flat on their backs, letting the weight of the stars press gently against their chests. It was said that Eridu was built beneath a mirror, not of glass, but of the firmament. The city's streets, temples, and sacred courtyards were aligned to reflect the celestial movements above, not rigidly, not as domination, but as conversation. The ziggurat, modest in height but grand in intent, was placed so that during the spring equinox, the first light of dawn would pass directly through its gate, illuminating the inner sanctum with a line of gold. The ancients took this as a greeting, a celestial nod from the divine, a reminder that their city was not alone, that it was seen by something infinite. But there is more. The me, the sacred tablets of cosmic order, were said to be copies of the patterns in the sky, encoded fragments of the heavens made tactile, so that humans might live in harmony with the rhythms that pulse above. To break from these rhythms was not just foolish, it was dangerous. The stars carried memory. They told when to plant, when to gather, when to mourn. They whispered the tides of fate. In flickers of light, only those trained in silence could truly hear. The priests of the firmament, a separate order from the water priests of Enki, kept vigil on the rooftops and ziggurat terraces. They marked the shifting of Venus, counted the breaths between eclipses, listened to the pauses between falling stars. They believed that when a star fell, it was not dying, but returning, that stars did not belong to the sky alone, but to a cycle much larger than heaven. They taught that we, too, are made of stars, not metaphorically, but literally. When you speak, one high priest once said, your voice is remembered by the sky. It becomes a ripple among the stars, a thread woven into the night. Children were taught to whisper their secrets to the stars, not for wishes, but for witness. And the stars responded with dreams. It was common in Eridu for people to share visions, unconnected by blood or proximity, but bound by the same celestial dream. A flood of fire, a serpent with eyes like moons, a woman in white who touched the ziggurat and turned to smoke. Were they prophecies or memories or something in between? Perhaps they were the city remembering itself through the mirror of the sky. But as the years passed, the echoes grew fainter. The stars, they said, began to turn away. Some nights they did not rise on time. Others shimmered in strange colors or danced in patterns no priest could decipher. And then, for 3 nights in one season, no stars appeared at all, only a thick darkness, so complete that even the ziggurat felt smaller beneath it. The people grew uneasy. The silence between them and the heavens had widened. A woman, an elder of the star priest lineage, took a bowl of black pitch and crushed mica, painting spirals across her arms and face. She climbed the ziggurat alone and stood beneath the empty sky. There, she sang, a song older than speech, rising from the bones rather than the throat. When she finished, a single star blinked back into view. They say it was her soul, given in exchange for memory. A pact renewed, a reminder that even in silence, connection remains. Now, when we look up at night, we do not always feel what they felt. The sky feels colder, more distant, but it listens still. And if you lie back, let your breath slow, and let your eyes rest not on the stars, but with them, you may hear it, the faintest echo, Eridu, calling across time, answering the light that never truly left. Sleep now, and let the stars remember you. The rains had not come in weeks. The Euphrates murmured lower, its voice cracked and weary. And in the heart of Eridu, where once the water sparkled through sacred channels, there was now only silence. But the silence was not empty. It was full, with something waiting, breathing. They said the fires came quietly, not as a storm, not with rage, but with intention. The sky had grown strangely still in the days before. Birds had stopped singing at dawn. Dogs howled without cause. And in the marketplace, a pot cracked in the hands of a child who had not dropped it. Then, one night, smoke curled out of the temple's lower sanctum. Thin at first, then thicker, then black as the forgotten corners of dream. People ran, shouting of accident, of sabotage, of punishment, but no one could say why it had begun. Only that it spread, through the temple, through the quarters of the priests, through the streets paved with dust and memory. And when it was over, Eridu was quiet again, but different. The city, once gold in the daylight and silver under stars, was now gray. Ash coated the ziggurat like an old man's sorrow. Smoke clung to the stones like breath that refused to leave. And in the stillness, people began to dream of him, a god buried beneath the ruins, not slain, not gone, but waiting. A presence curled beneath the foundation like a sleeping lion, or a coal not yet cold. He had once walked among them, Enki, lord of the deep, but now he had descended into the ashes, into the dust, into the silence. The priests, shaken and soot-streaked, whispered among themselves, Some said the god had burned himself in grief, offering his body to protect the secrets hidden within me, the sacred laws of creation. Others believed he had been betrayed, that the pact made under the Euphrates had been broken, and the fire was the price of neglect. A third voice, quieter still, claimed that Enki had chosen to descend, not in despair, but in defiance, that he had wrapped himself in flame as one wraps in a cloak, and burrowed deep into the ash to hide what the heavens could no longer be trusted to hold. Because the gods, too, warred, and knowledge, once given, could be taken. So he buried himself beneath the scorched temple, under the cracked stones where worshippers once laid bowls of honey and oil. Behind the murals, now blackened by smoke, the children of clay and flame, those mysterious ones who had vanished before the fires, were said to have felt it, that they knew the descent was coming, that perhaps they had gone to join him, to keep vigil, and the signs remained. In the ash-covered ruins, small pools formed, not from rain, but from tears seeping through the stone, tears that burned slightly when touched, but left no wounds, only remembering. An old woman, one of the last of the serpent tenders, went to the heart of the ruins each morning. She would sweep the ash away from a single square stone, kneel, whisper a name, then press her ear to the ground. When asked why, she said, "He still breathes, not through lungs, but through memory, through us." And then she would hum a melody no one else could follow, but which made the air warmer, the ash lighter. Now, centuries later, we stand above that silence. Archaeologists brush away layers of soot, fingertips trembling over symbols melted and scorched. They wonder what burned and what survived. They catalog the ruins. But the god is not in the artifacts, not in the stone. He is beneath the ash, beneath the forgetting, beneath the moment when reverence became ritual and ritual became routine. He waits not to return, but to remind that wisdom is not light alone. It is fire. It warms. It warns. And when unheeded, it burns. So lie still now. Let the ash settle softly on your shoulders. Breathe with the buried god. And remember, what is hidden is not lost. What sleeps does not forget. And what once burned still glows in the silence. In a city where gods once walked in silence and water spoke in dreams, there was a woman who sang, not to men, not to children, not even to the gods, but to fire. Her name is not preserved in clay. No tablet bears her voice, yet her story lingers, woven through the smoke that still rises, unseen, from the broken stones of Eridu. She was not born to power. She was born to ash, a child of ordinary parents, raised in the shadow of the ziggurat, where reed roofs swayed with the wind, and laughter lived easily among the market smells of salt and honey. But even as a girl, she was different. When others played with water, she cupped her hand around heat. When others sought shade, she stood beneath the sun, arms outstretched as though greeting something only she could see. She would light small fires beside the canal at dusk, little pyramids of dry twigs, no larger than a prayer. And to them, she would sing, not lullabies, not hymns, but strange, wordless melodies that made the flames sway as if listening, as if responding. The neighbors whispered. Some said she was touched by Enki. Others said cursed by something older, a spirit that slept beneath the blackened bones of creation. But she grew, and with her, the fires grew too. By the time she was a woman, priests had taken notice. One claimed she had been born during a solar eclipse, a rare one when both sun and moon vanished, and the sky turned silver for a breathless moment. They summoned her to the temple, not to honor her, but to observe her, to study the way she walked, to record the heat that followed in her steps, to watch how the candles flared when she entered a room. And then they asked her to sing. They brought her to the inner sanctum of the house of deep waters, where incense curled through the columns, and the sacred basin reflected only shadows. The priests formed a circle, silent and skeptical, robes drawn tight, fingers stained with ash and ink, and she stood in the center, barefoot, eyes closed. She sang. The sound that emerged was not loud, not dramatic. It began low, like the hum of embers beneath kindling, a vibration more than a melody, a memory rising. As she sang, the torches flickered, the oil lamps trembled, and the brazier in the center, cold for days, suddenly flared to life, not violently, not with destruction, but with clarity. The room turned golden, the shadows lifted, and the priests, for a moment, felt warmth not on their skin, but in their bones. After that, they kept her close, gave her a title, a chamber, a role in the rites, but they did not understand her. They tried to bind her flame in scrolls, in rules, in rituals, and fire does not love cages. She grew restless. She stopped singing on command. She wandered the streets at night, barefoot in the soot, whispering to dying torches, igniting them without touch. And then the visions began. She would speak in sleep, of smoke rising from the ziggurat, of waters retreating, of the sacred me shattering like clay pots, of a fire not hers. But when she could not stop, one night she vanished. Some said she fled to the desert. Others claimed the priests silenced her, fearful that her flame would consume their order. But a few believe she chose to burn. That when the fires came to Eridu, those strange, sudden flames that devoured the temple, she was at the center, not screaming, not running, but singing. Her song, soft, ancient, devastating, rose through the fire like a final prayer. Not a sorrow, but a release. And even as the walls collapsed, even as the sacred basin cracked, and the waters boiled, some swore they heard her voice, woven through the roar. A note of joy, a note of farewell. Now, only the ash remains. But sometimes, in the deepest part of the night, when wind passes through the ruins just so, a flicker rises, and for a breath, you hear it, not in your ears, but beneath your ribs. A song, faint, familiar, calling something warm and old in you. To wake. The woman who sang the flame is gone, but her song lingers, because fire forgets nothing, and neither does the soul. Once, the gardens of Eridu bloomed like hymns, not loud, not lavish, but alive with intention. Places planted not for beauty alone, but for balance. The Garden of Reeds, as it was known, lay just beyond the temple walls, where the sacred canals wove like silver veins through the earth. There, the tall papyrus stalks swayed gently with the breeze, and the lotus opened its soft blue mouths to the sun. It was not a garden for show. It was not arranged in symmetry, nor tamed with lines and borders. It was wild but wise, allowed to grow in harmony with the wind, the sun, and the rhythms of the river's breath. Priests and priestesses would walk barefoot through the reeds at dawn, not to gather herbs, but to listen, because the reeds spoke. Their rustling was a language, a grammar of touch and time, not meant to be translated, only received. The garden was tended by silence, by moonlight, by reverence. It was said that the gods bathed there, not in grandeur, but in the simplicity of shadow and dew. That Enki himself once stood in waist-deep water, cupping reeds in his hands, weaving them into circles that hummed when held. The children of the city were told that the reeds knew your name before you were born, that if you walked into the garden with a question in your heart, The wind would shape the answer in the bending stalks, not in words, but in feeling, a peace, a pull, a presence. But one evening, when the sun hung low and thick clouds bruised the sky, a different kind of whisper stirred the garden. Smoke. At first, it was faint, a gray thread curling at the edge of the canal, dancing among the reeds like a visitor unsure of its welcome. But soon it thickened. It moved with purpose, not up like a column, but sideways, spreading through the green like a hand. The reeds didn't burn. Not yet. They trembled. People noticed the silence first. No birds, no frogs, not even the rustle of fish between the roots. The garden, once so full of murmured life, had fallen into a waiting hush, like lungs held just before a scream. And then the fire came. It didn't rage. It crept, low to the ground, without flame at first, only heat, rising from the soil like guilt. Some said it began in the southern edge, where a priest had poured wine not for offering, but for himself. Others said the woman who sang the flame had walked here, barefoot and humming, with tears on her face and ash on her skin. But no one could say with certainty how it started, only that it spread in patterns. Not wild, but deliberate. The reeds began to glow at the roots, each stalk bowing as if in prayer, then collapsing into smoke. The lotuses closed, not in fear, but as though falling asleep. And still, no cries, no panic, only the sound of loss, moving like a ghost through the stalks. The priests arrived too late. By the time they stood at the edge of the garden, the smoke had made its own temple, a shifting hall of gray and gold, where air shimmered with memory. Some entered, but did not return. Not dead, but altered. They emerged silent, with eyes that no longer blinked in sunlight. They walked as if made of water, and slept without dreaming. The next morning, the garden was gone. Where once the reeds had danced, there was only blackened earth, and a faint smell of honey and sorrow. The canal had receded. The frogs did not return. The fish had disappeared. But in the stillness, something remained. At the center of the scar garden, there stood a single stalk of reed, unburned, untouched, its roots sunk deep into the ash. It did not sway. It did not speak. It simply stood. The elders built a circle of stones around it, not as warning, but as remembrance. They came in silence, left bowls of water, touched the earth with open palms, because they understood. The garden had not died. It had been taken, drawn back into the dream from which it came, carried on smoke, to a place where the gods still listened. Now, when the wind brushes through the palms near Eridu's ruins, there is sometimes a sound, a whisper low and tender, like reeds bending in soft water. It is not the garden. It is the echo of the garden, the memory of balance, of humility, of a world that once sang with the voices of leaves and flame and stillness. Rest now. Let the smoke curl softly around your thoughts. It does not come a harm, only to remind that some things must burn, to be heard again. There's a kind of silence that arrives after betrayal. Not loud, not sudden, but deep, heavy, unmistakable. It hums beneath the skin like an ache without name. And that silence came to Eridu on the night the water turned away, not long before the city's final breath, when the flames had cooled to ash, and the garden of reeds lay in smoldering sleep. The Euphrates, that ancient artery of life, began to change its voice. At first it was subtle. The priests noticed the flow was slower than usual. The sacred canals, once plump and glistening like veins of moonlight, began to thin. The wellsprings coughed air. The pools in the temple basin shivered, not from wind, but from absence. Still, no one panicked. It was dry season, they said, a shift in the wind, a momentary hush. But those who knew how to listen, the oldest water watchers, the barefoot women who fetched their jugs before sunrise, they felt it. The presence of the river was different because the Euphrates was never just water. It was memory. It was promise. It was a living spirit that had chosen, once, to stay. And now, it had begun to reconsider. The dreams of the city grew strange. Children spoke of waking to find fish gasping on dry stone. A merchant dreamed of his boat stuck in the middle of the canal, as the river around him turned to sand. One morning, the sacred basin in the temple was found dry. No spill, no crack, no sign of tampering, just still, sun-baked emptiness, where water had lived for centuries. The priests tried to refill it. They poured in jars from the well, but by evening, the basin was dry again, as if the stone itself refused to hold. Then, the canals began to collapse inward, not from drought, but as if something had withdrawn. A divine breath pulled back, into silence. The fields, once golden with barley and rich with sesame, withered into brittle thread. Even the marshes, those soft green cradles at the city's edge, began to rot. The frogs fell quiet. The birds flew east and did not return. And in the heart of the city, a quiet terror began to take root, because the people of Eridu did not just use the water. They depended on its forgiveness. It had carried their offerings, bathed their dead, heard their songs, softened the clay for their temples, and whispered back to them in dreams. But now, it was leaving. The old myths returned then, spoken in low tones around cooking fires, that the gods, wounded by pride and neglect, had turned their gaze elsewhere. That Enki, Lord of the Deep, had buried himself beneath the ashes and taken the river with him. The priests searched the ziggurat for answers, descending into forgotten chambers, where dust lay thick and the walls hummed with sorrow. One, an elder scribe with cracked hands and a tremble in his knees, found a tablet long buried beneath soot. Its symbols were old, older than the language they used, but he translated enough to understand the warning. When the flow forgets the name, when silence fills the well, the earth shall speak in thirst, and only those who remember the first water will drink again. That night, the river vanished. Not completely, not like a door slamming shut, but like a mother who turns her back slowly, tears in her eyes, knowing she must go. The current stilled, the banks cracked, and the air grew thick with the scent of silt, warm and rotting. People stood in the riverbed the next morning, ankle deep in dust, looking for meaning, for answers, but the river had none left to give. It had spoken, not in words, but in departure, and in its absence, a deeper silence came, the silence of realization, that something had been lost not in one night, but slowly, over years, in forgotten rituals, in careless prayers, in a noise that had replaced reverence. Even now, the bones of that riverbed remain, curled through the earth like a scar, a memory of motion, a shadow of grace. And if you kneel by its edge, in a place where no water flows, you might hear it, not the river itself, but the echo of its leaving, a hush too heavy to name. Sleep now, with your ear close to the silence. Let it teach you what sound cannot, because when water turns away, what remains is truth. In the days after the water vanished, when the air in Eridu hung heavy with silence, and the sun no longer reflected off canals but off bone-dry stone, a strange hush fell over the city. It wasn't the quiet of sleep, nor the reverent stillness of temple prayer. This was the silence of waiting, a city perched on the edge of something it could not name. And amid the ruin, a child wandered, no older than 6 summers, skin dusted with silt, hair tangled from wind that no longer carried coolness. She had no name anyone remembered. Her parents were gone, perhaps taken by the sickness that came with the river's retreat, or by the quiet madness that gripped many in those days. But the child remained, a ghost among the living. Small and barefoot, she walked the alleyways of Eridu as if in a trance. She did not speak. She did not cry. She simply moved, from ruin to ruin, pausing before walls that had once held laughter, now dark with soot and spiderwebs. At dusk, when the few remaining oil lamps were lit with trembling hands, she could be seen in the temple courtyard, where once priests had poured libations. She knelt before the cracked altar, her tiny fingers tracing the burnt edges of what had been. And then she did something that froze even the air around her. She reached out and scooped a handful of ash from the base of the altar, that sacred spot where Enki's name had once been sung at sunrise, and brought it to her mouth. No one moved. She placed it on her tongue, held it there, not chewing, not swallowing, only feeling, and her eyes closed, as if listening, as if remembering something the world had tried to forget. A priestess, one of the few left, approached, trembling, and asked the girl, "Why? Why would you taste the ruin?" The child opened her eyes, blackened with soot, glowing softly beneath the grime, and she whispered, "Because it remembers better than we do." Those who witnessed it spoke of what happened next only once, and never again. They said the girl stood, that she walked to the cracked ziggurat stones, and pressed her palm against them, and that the wall, dead for years, sighed, not a sound exactly, but a release, a tremor, as though something inside the stone had stirred. Some claimed they saw the faintest glow around her fingers. Others said they saw the shapes of letters, ancient, fluid, rise like smoke from her skin. But all agreed on one thing. From that day forward, wherever the child walked, the air grew heavier, as if she carried with her the weight of memory. She did not speak again. She lived among the ruins, nourishing herself on figs that no longer ripened, drinking from wells that should have long run dry, but gave her enough. The people began to fear her, not for what she did, but for what she knew, because ashes, they realized, are not the end of a thing. They are its essence, stripped of illusion. They are what remains when everything else is burned away. And this child, this quiet, soot-covered girl, had placed that truth on her tongue. She had tasted the failure, the silence, the forgetting, and she had survived it. Some called her a witch, others a saint, but none dared stop her. She wandered the ruins with calm steps, visiting each sacred site, each broken courtyard, each garden turned to dust. And everywhere she went, she whispered the same words. Still here, still listening, when she finally disappeared, vanished as softly as a breeze between crumbling walls. They found only a single thing in her place, a small clay tablet, unfired, fragile as a breath. No words were etched upon it, only the imprint of a tongue, pressed softly into its center, and below it, in delicate strokes, one symbol, the ancient sign for remembrance. It rests now in a museum, cold behind glass, surrounded by fragments of a city most have forgotten. But if you were to stand before it at night, alone, and lean close enough, you might feel a warmth rise from it, faint like breath, like a whisper, and you might hear, not with your ears, but with the softest part of your soul, still here, still listening. So close your eyes and taste the silence. It is bitter, yes, but within it lies the truth of all things. What we lose never truly leaves. Long after the voices had faded from the temple halls, after the canals lay cracked like the lips of a dying man, and the ziggurat stood hollow, its peak a perch only for wind and carrion birds, the city dreamed, not its people, not its priests, the city itself. Eridu, once cradled in water and sunlight, now curled into itself like an old body succumbing to sleep. And in that sleep, it dreamed one last time. No one knows how it began, but the few who remained, those stubborn souls who had not fled, who had chosen to stay and tend the dust with cracked hands and hollow eyes. They felt it. It started with a strange quiet, not the silence of emptiness, but of gathering, as if the stones had begun whispering to one another, passing ancient words from brick to brick, reed to reed. A shepherd saw it first, at dawn, as the sky broke open in thin lavender light. He walked the edge of what had once been the sacred canal. There in the stillness, he saw a reflection in the dry bed, though no water remained. A boat, not real, not made of wood or reed, but a shimmer, translucent, glowing faintly with a blue-white hue, as if carved from breath. It glided without sound, and within it sat a figure, hooded, faceless, but unmistakably present. He blinked, and it was gone. Later that same day, a woman gathering wild herbs near the temple ruins collapsed, not from heat or hunger, but from something she could only describe as hearing too much. When she awoke, she wept. "I saw the city," she whispered, "but not as it is, as it was. And yet, not even then. It was brighter." One by one, the dreams began to spread. Children, their bellies empty but their eyes wide, spoke of walking streets paved with stars, of drinking from fountains that sang their names, of gods, not towering and distant, but gentle, with soft hands and eyes filled with mourning. The dreams were not only beautiful, they were true, not in the way memory is true, but in the way longing is, in the way a song long forgotten still echoes in the chest when hummed by another. And they all dreamed the same thing, though they did not know it. They dreamed of a return, of the city lifted from its dust, reborn not in stone, but in essence. The water flowed again, but it carried light, not liquid. The temple stood tall, but it glowed from within, as though lit by the hearts of the faithful. In this dream, there was no hierarchy, no priesthood, no rituals born of fear, only presence, only love. And in the sky above, the constellations shifted into words, into names, names of those who had lived, who had prayed, who had built and fallen, the forgotten, the lost. They hung in the firmament, not for worship, but for remembrance. And at the center of it all, the ziggurat, no longer a climb, but a cradle, its tears folded inward, like petals, gathering the dream into one final bloom. Then, on the seventh night, the dream ceased. All at once, those who had felt it woke with tears, with aching in their ribs, as though something precious had been cradled there, then taken. The air in Eridu felt different, still, but lighter, like a room after someone you loved has left, and their scent still lingers. The elders said it was the soul of the city, that Eridu had gathered all it could, held on as long as it was able, and in its last act of mercy, had offered its dream to those who would remember. A gift, a promise, a quiet farewell. Now, when you walk among the ruins, you might see nothing but dirt and fragments, but the stones hum. If you listen, the dust shimmers. If you slow down, and sometimes, in that thin space between waking and sleep, you might step into that last dream. You might walk among the glowing courtyards, hear the songs rising from invisible wells, feel the warmth of a god's hand at your back, guiding you not toward worship, but toward wholeness. Eridu is gone, but its dream remains, and it waits, not to be rebuilt in brick, but to be remembered in you. Sleep now, and let it carry you. The boat is still gliding. The river is still beneath you, and the stars are still watching. When cities die, we often imagine it as a collapse, a sudden ruin, a loud breaking of stone and soul, an event sharp enough to leave a scar. But Eridu did not fall. It descended, not like a tower crumbling from its highest brick, but like dusk, soft, slow, almost beautiful. There was no final battle, no invading horde, no trumpet blare of doom. There was only a kind of quiet surrender, a sigh that lasted generations, a gentle turning inward, and in that way the city slipped, from memory into myth, from the surface of the world into its depth. The process began with forgetting, not by the people, but by the world around them. Caravans stopped coming, trade routes shifted, pilgrims chose new gods, cities with taller ziggurats, stronger walls, louder voices. Eridu remained as it always had, modest, reverent, more concerned with listening than proclaiming, but in a world growing louder. Such softness was mistaken for weakness, and so the scribes stopped recording. The kings ceased their visits. The maps omitted the name, but the city still lived. Its people whispered their prayers as they always had, kneeling not before power, but before the mystery that had always held them. Even as the water vanished and the gods grew silent, they did not rage. They mourned, with ritual, with dreams, with the simple act of lighting a lamp at dusk, knowing it would not be seen, but needing to light it all the same. Some say that in its final years, Eridu became more real than ever. Its soul peeled bare of grandeur, its bones exposed to the sky. Children still played among the broken stones. Old women sang to the wind in doorways that opened to no roof. And in the ruined courtyard of the temple, a boy sat carving a spiral into soft clay, not knowing why, only that it felt right. There are stories of the last priest, a man with silver hair and a voice like distant thunder. He stood one final time at the peak of the ziggurat, not to offer sacrifice, but to say goodbye, not to the gods, but to time, to the years that had passed through his hands like sand, to the river that no longer came, to the flame that had once answered his breath. He said nothing aloud, only raised his palms to the stars, and then descended the steps, never to climb them again. It was not a fall. It was a folding, like a scroll rolled up and placed in a clay jar, like a body curling into sleep, like a song trailing into silence at the end of the breath. And when the last soul left Eridu, it did not cry. It remembered. That's how cities like this go, not into rubble, but into story. They become places that live just beneath the waking world, in dreams, in half-remembered symbols, in the hum of reeds swaying at the edge of memory. And centuries later, when explorers brush away the dust, when archaeologists find tablets beneath the broken floor, they do not discover Eridu. They wake it, for it never truly ended. It only lowered itself into the deeper rhythm of time, the part that moves beneath the surface, slow and sacred. Now, when you hear the word Eridu, let it fall gently in your mind, not as a name, but as a gesture, a bow, a sigh, a quiet hand pressed to the earth. It did not fall. It chose its silence. And in that silence, it waits, not to be found, but to be remembered. So close your eyes. Let yourself descend, not in fear, but in reverence. The city is still there, just beneath your breath. Among the many myths whispered by the wind that slips through the bones of Eridu, none is more elusive or more sacred than that of the library that vanished without fire. It is not listed in records. No tablet names its scribes. No map shows its walls. And yet those who listen closely to the soil, those who kneel with their palms to the cracked earth where the temple once stood, swear they can feel it, a faint hum, like breath caught beneath the ground, soft as a buried heart still beating. They say that beneath Eridu's ziggurat, beneath even the temple of Enki and the chambers where serpents dreamed, there lay a library unlike any other, not built for kings, not meant for display, but for preservation of the oldest truths, the first stories, the raw light of thought before it hardened into doctrine. It was called, in hushed tones, the Archive of First Fire, and it held not only tablets, but scrolls of woven reed, bundles of stitched hide inked with oils, and jars of black sand said to contain spoken words, not as metaphor, but as sound itself, pressed into particles waiting to be heard again. This library was never lit by flame. Its walls were cooled by the breath of the Abzu. Its shells were carved into the living stone, curving like riverbeds, each holding knowledge not only of this world, but of the many that might have been. Only a handful were allowed to enter, not the highest priests, but the tenders, those born with memory in their hands, whose dreams echoed with languages they had never been taught. These tenders did not read. They listened. They touched the tablets not to decode, but to receive, to become vessels for what slept beneath script. The me, the divine laws, were said to have been copied here, not once, but many times, and not in words alone, but in vibration, pattern, gesture. It was a library not only of what was known, but what could not be said, and that made it dangerous, because as Eridu began its slow descent into forgetting, the library remembered too much. It held the unbroken line between the gods and humankind. It held the names of stars that no longer burned. It held the truth about why the water turned away, why the fire sang, and why the city had begun to lose its reflection, and so had to be hidden, not destroyed, for nothing so sacred could be burned, but sunk. The last of the tenders, 7 in number, gathered in the night. They wore robes soaked in river oil and ash, each carrying a single word, etched on clay, heavy as fate. They entered the lower chamber, passed beneath the carved serpent arch, and laid their tablets in a circle. Each placed their palm upon the floor, closed their eyes, and began to hum. The sound was low, not music, not prayer. It was the frequency of release. And as they hummed, the walls began to tremble. Dust fell in slow spirals from the ceiling. The air thickened, and then the stone began to open. Not crack, not collapse, but part, as if something ancient beneath had sighed and made room. The tenders whispered the final word, unrecorded by any scribe, and the library descended, not as a ruin, but as a seed. It folded into the ground, layer by layer, the shelves embracing the tablets, the air condensing into a stillness so complete that even time could not erode it. When the priests returned the next day, the chamber was gone. No door, no steps, only smooth stone, warm to the touch, humming faintly if one dared to kneel and listen. And so the archive of First Fire passed out of memory, but not out of existence, because every few decades, someone dreams of it. A child in the desert who wakes with clay under their nails. A woman who paints symbols in her sleep. A man who hears voices in cracked stone. They all say the same thing. It's still down there, waiting, not to be found by force, but to be remembered back into being. It is said that when the world is ready, when the noise finally breaks, and the silence is welcomed again, the library will rise, not through excavation, but through recognition. And the words it holds, those buried syllables of fire and water, will not be spoken. They will be felt as warmth behind the ribs, as tears without grief, as a truth so old, it returns as peace. So rest now. Let your thoughts settle like ash. Let the hum of the hidden chambers beneath you rise like a memory you've carried for lifetimes. The library is still breathing, and somewhere in its silence, your name is already written. There comes a moment in the slow unraveling of sacred places when time stops moving forward and instead begins to loop, not visibly, but inwardly, like a thought you cannot stop thinking, a grief that returns in dreams. That moment came to Eridu in the form of an echo. Not a sound, not a voice, but something deeper, a vibration that rose not from the wind, nor from the water that had long abandoned its path, but from beneath the ziggurat, the oldest breath of stone in the city. The people didn't speak of it, not because they didn't hear it, but because it made speaking feel small. It began after the final rains, the ones that fell too late to save the gardens, too brief to soothe the soil, the ones that smelled not of life, but of farewell. In the days after those rains, the ziggurat began to hum, soft at first, like the distant ring of a bell heard through layers of cloth, but consistent, relentless, a sound that felt like memory rubbing against bone. The priest had long since abandoned the temple's inner sanctum, but a few returned, drawn not by duty, but by something they couldn't name. They descended the steps with oil lamps and empty hands, passing the burned murals, the broken offerings, the altar blackened by time and fire. At the base of the ziggurat, where the old access to the sacred chamber of Enki had been sealed by collapse, they pressed their palms to the stone and felt it, a pulse, like a heartbeat in stone, slow, measured, patient. One priest, old and nearly blind, fell to his knees. He began to weep, not from fear, but from recognition. He whispered, "It's still speaking." But what was speaking? The gods were silent. The water was gone. The fire had burned itself into memory. And yet, beneath all that, something remained, something that had never left. They called it the echo, though the word fails. It wasn't merely sound. It was a feeling behind the ribs, a pressure in the chest, a presence that made you aware of your feet on the earth, your breath in your throat, the space between your thoughts. It didn't speak in words. It didn't offer visions. It waited. It waited for someone, anyone, to understand that the divine had never been in the fire, nor in the water, nor in the rituals. It had always lived beneath, in the spaces between sound, in the dust between footsteps, in the hush after a prayer. One evening, a young girl climbed the ziggurat alone. She had no title, no lineage, only curiosity and a strange ache that would not leave her chest. At the top, she sat cross-legged and closed her eyes. She didn't chant. She didn't ask. She listened, and the echo rose to meet her. It filled her not with knowledge, but with knowing, the kind that cannot be written or spoken, only carried, like fire in the belly or sorrow in the blood. She stayed there all night. In the morning, the few who remained found her sleeping, not peacefully, but deeply, as though she had gone somewhere far beneath the world, and had not yet chosen to return. They say she woke days later, but her eyes were different, not distant, but ancient. She spoke little after that. Only this once. The gods were never above. They are beneath. They are behind. They are inside. Then she smiled and walked away from the ziggurat forever. Now, when the wind blows through Eridu's broken stones, it sometimes hits the old walls just right, and a sound rises, a low hum, a single note, as if the city is still breathing through its scars, not demanding to be rebuilt, not crying for vengeance, but simply reminding you there is always something beneath, beneath belief, beneath ruin, beneath your name. So lie still now. Let the hum rise up through your spine, soft as dusk. Let it settle behind your eyes, beneath your skin. The echo is still there, and it's waiting for you to remember what has always been yours. There is a night spoken of in the shadow stories of Eridu, a night so quiet, so utterly still, that even the stars seem to draw back, leaving only the soft, pale curve of the moon, hanging above a city that no longer dared to speak. It was the night the moon forgot her name. That is how they told it. Not that she disappeared, not that she darkened, but that she simply lost herself. She had always been a guiding presence in Eridu, not a goddess of wrath, but of tender remembrance. She governed tides and sleep, oversaw birth dream, the soft and sacred rhythm of returning. Priestesses once bathed under her gaze in the Garden of Reeds, chanting her many names in secret syllables, their bodies glistening with sacred oil and night dew. Midwives whispered her into the ears of newborns, so their souls might not forget the place they came from. She had many names, each one a thread in a tapestry of silver. Nana, Sin, Isamud's Eye, Daughter of Night, the Pale Witness, and Eridu had always honored her, not with sacrifice, but with intimacy, with silence, with offerings of light. But something changed after the fire, after the water vanished, after the serpent coils of memory unwound themselves from the temples. The moon began to withdraw. At first, she came late, rising just as the sky began to pale, too shy to bathe the city in her old light. Then she began to shrink, not in phase, but in presence. Her glow grew thin, as if she was becoming a reflection of herself. And then came the night. The sky was clear, not a single cloud. The stars hung motionless, watchful, expectant. The people of Eridu, those few who still remained in the hollow shell of their once sacred city, felt the tension in the air. Children cried for no reason. Old men forgot their prayers. Even the wind seemed unsure of which direction to take. They gathered in the temple courtyard, where once incense had curled through the pillars, and the laughter of priestesses had echoed off polished stone. And they waited, but the moon did not rise. Hours passed, no silver arc on the horizon, no pale shimmer above the ziggurat, just a vast and unnamed blackness, full but empty, beautiful but blank. And in that darkness, the world tilted, not physically, but spiritually. Something shifted. They say a child, the same girl who had once spoken to the ashes, stood in the center of the courtyard, barefoot, arms outstretched, and called out, not with voice, but with longing. She whispered the names, all of them, one after another, until there were none left to say. And still, no answer, until a sound, not from the sky, but from within the earth. A slow, resonant hum, like the last exhale of something ancient that had been holding its breath for 1,000 years. And with it came a strange light, not above, but around. The stones began to glow, faintly, as if remembering what it meant to be seen. The dust shimmered. The ziggurat pulsed once, a heartbeat in stone, and above them, where the moon should have been, there appeared a blank circle, not a void, but a mirror, reflecting not the sky, but the watchers below. Each person saw themselves in that circle, but not as they were, as they once had been, or might yet be, not alone, not forgotten, not broken, just becoming. It lasted a moment, or perhaps an age. Then the circle dimmed, and the moon returned, slowly, softly. But she was different now, not diminished, but unwritten, as if she had erased her name, to make room for the names we had forgotten, as if she had descended into the silence of the city, to carry something back into the stars. In the days that followed, the night sky looked sharper, more intimate, and the dreams of those who remained were vivid, full of rivers that never dried, gardens that bloomed in stone, and a soft light that seemed to follow them wherever they walked. Some say the moon had not forgotten her name. She had simply given it away, to the city that had lost its own. And in doing so, she became something truer, not a goddess, but a memory made whole. So sleep now, under her watch. Let her light fall gently on your skin, not as illumination, but as a question. Who are you beneath your name? And what might you become if for one night you chose to forget so that you could finally remember what you were before the world taught you who to be? The moon knows, and she is still watching. When a city dies, the dust remains. It gathers in doorways, sleeps in the hollows of forgotten footsteps, clings to the lips of broken statues, and sighs into the air whenever memory dares to stir. But in Eridu, the dust did more than settle. It remembered, and someone, they say, was chosen to carry it. No one knew his name. Some claimed he was born during the last true flood, when the water returned just once, to kiss the bones of the ziggurat before vanishing forever. Others whispered he had no parents, that he emerged from the earth itself, a child shaped by grief and wind, born with the city's last breath still caught in his lungs. He was seen often, but never clearly, a thin figure wrapped in robes the color of old ash, his face streaked with dust, like the carved reliefs worn smooth by time. He never spoke, never begged, never stopped moving. He walked the ruins slowly, with a woven satchel slung across his back, its fabric tattered and stained, with a deep ochre of desert stone. Inside that satchel was dust, not sand, not soil, but sacred dust, the soft residue of stories, the powdered remains of forgotten prayers, the fine ash of burned tablets, of crushed offerings, of skin that once belonged to those who loved the gods. Every evening, when the sun leaned low against the horizon and the ruins bled gold, he would reach into the satchel and scatter a handful of that dust across the wind, not randomly, not carelessly, but with deep, meditative precision. He stood in the same places each night, on the temple's broken threshold, at the base of the ziggurat, in the center of the old marketplace, beneath the faded arch where lovers once passed beneath garlands of wild jasmine. He would lift the dust to the breeze, watch it spiral into the air, and whisper something no one could hear. They say the dust responded. Then in the moments after he scattered it, the air grew warm, the wind stilled, the silence deepened into something alive. And if you dared to close your eyes in that moment, you might see things, not hallucinations, but echoes. A woman's laughter in a garden lawn vanished. The rustle of papyrus scrolls in a hand that no longer existed. The soft clapping of sandals on whetstone. A child's voice speaking a god's name. For the very first time, he carried this dust not for magic, nor for mourning, but for continuity, because someone had to. Someone had to remember not with their mind, but with their body, with feet that walked the patterns of sacred ground. Long after the rituals were abandoned, he was the city's last breathwalker, the one who did not try to rebuild, but to preserve, through movement, through gesture, through reverence too quiet to write down. The elders left him food, bowls of dates, water drawn from the deepest well, bread baked with salt and song. He never accepted it in front of them, but each morning the bowls were empty, and each evening the dust rose again. One night he vanished. No footprints led away from the city. No body was found. Only the satchel remained, laid gently atop the cracked altar stone, its fabric folded with care. Inside, a single handful of dust, glowing faintly in the moonlight. Some believe he became part of the city, that his body dissolved into wind, that his breath lives now in the spaces between stones. Others say he still walks. In other places, other ruins, carrying the memories of all things lost and never grieved. But every year, on the night the moon forgets her name, a strange breeze passes through Eridu, and in that breeze, the dust rises. Just once, it swirls above the ziggurat, moves through the temple's broken columns, and dances across the empty streets like a whisper remembering how to speak. So sleep now. The dust is still carried. The stories are still in the wind. And someone, somewhere, is still walking, with the weight of forgotten wonders on their back. There is a story older than clay, older than fire, older even in the name Eridu itself, of a door. Not a door built by hands, nor hung upon hinges, not one that opens into rooms, or closes against wind, but a door beneath the dream of stone, a threshold that waits, underneath the city, not in ruins, but in memory, not behind walls, but within them. The priest spoke of it only in murmurs, and only when the candles burned low, when the temple was nearly empty, and the air was thick with incense and hush. They called it Arabnijanu, the gate of unbecoming, a place where the known falls away. In the silence behind, all things speaks its one true name. No one had ever seen it, and yet they all described it the same. A smooth black surface, not carved but grown, as if the stone itself had dreamed it into being. It shimmered, not with light, but with absence. It drew in sound, pulled a breath, asked not questions, but memory. The door, it was said, did not appear to seekers, but to rememberers, to those who did not wish to escape or conquer, but to surrender, to something far older than understanding. The myths tell of one who entered, a woman, a weaver of funerary cloths, who had lost her husband and her son to the same river. In a season of impossible drought, she did not rage. She did not beg. She simply returned to the ziggurat night after night, laying her cloths along the broken altars, singing softly to stones, no longer warm with God breath. And one night, the stone opened, not cracked, not shifted, but parted, revealing a curve of blackness, so quiet it trembled with presence. They say she stepped forward without fear, that she laid her hands against the stone and whispered her grief, as if it were an offering, and the door accepted her, not vanished, not devoured, received. She was never seen again, but the next morning, the broken reeds along the riverbank bloomed, blue and gold, colors not seen since the city's first spring. Others tried to find the door. Priests fasted. Children wandered the ruins barefoot. Scribes carved invocations into their own skin. But the door did not open again, because it was not a door for the desperate. It was a door for the honest, for those willing to be unmade. One scribe in the city's last days wrote of the door in a fragment of verse. It opens not with key or hand, but with the weight you choose to drop. It does not lead to death, but to the place before birth. Now, in the long silence of Eridu, beneath the dust and shattered bricks, some say the door is still there, hidden not by stone, but by stillness, that if one were to lie down upon the earth and weep without reason, if one were to let go of the name they were given and speak instead with the voice of their forgetting, the door might open again, not to show answers, but to invite rest. Not to end you, but to dissolve the noise that has covered the truth you have always carried. The truth that you are more than memory, more than body, more than loss, that you are part of the silence beneath the stone. So tonight, as sleep drifts its veil across your mind, do not reach, do not ask, do not knock. Simply rest. Let the old weight fall from your shoulders. Let your breath slow until it hums like distant wind through the reeds. And if in that softness you feel something stir beneath you, a breath from deep below, a warmth like being held from within, you may have found it. The door beneath the dream. The gate that waits, not to take you, but to remind you, you are never alone in the silence. You are the silence, and the stone remembers. There is one story left, a story whispered only by the wind that no longer circles Eridu stones. A story so strange, so soft, that even time dares not speak it aloud. It is the story of the night. The city did not crumble, did not burn, did not vanish, but rose into the sky, not all at once, not with thunder or rapture, but in silence, in shadow, like a breath returned to its lungs. After too many years away, it begins at the hour when stars first shimmer against the fabric of dusk, when the air turns cool and the ground releases its warmth like a sleeping animal. It was said that on this night, long after Eridu was believed to be nothing but ruin and bone, the sky leaned closer, not with light, but with memory. No one was there to witness it, and yet, somehow, we remember. They say the broken stones began to hum again, that the ziggurat, buried halfway in dust and silence, trembled not from weight, but from recognition, as though the stars had spoken its name, and it remembered who it had been. A glow, faint as a candle beneath water, rose from its base, not upwards, but inwards, illuminating the cracks, the carvings, the footprints left by souls long gone. And then, one by one, the structures began to lift, not fly, not soar, but detach, quietly, as if pulled by threads unseen. The walls drifted up like leaves caught in a gentle tide. The altars unfolded like flower petals. The gates open wide, not for those coming in, but for something leaving. What rose into the sky that night was not the Eridu of stone and clay. It was the other city, the reflected city, the remembered city, the Eridu that had lived in dreams, in the breath of prayers, in the hush between footsteps, the Eridu that had not fallen, because it had never fully been built. Not in this world, not entirely. This city, this skybound Eridu, was made not of material, but of meaning. Each brick a memory, each stair a sigh, each spire a song that had once been sung beside a sacred canal. It rose slowly, gracefully, until it touched the stars. And then it disappeared, but not into absence, into place. A place we cannot find with our eyes, but which lives just beyond the veil of waking. A place we visit when our dreams grow too quiet to ignore. When we close our eyes, not just to sleep, but to return, because Eridu did not end. It did not die. It ascended, not as reward, but as realization. It became what it had always whispered it was. Not a city of kings, not a monument to gods, but a threshold, a meeting point between longing and eternity, a mirror held up to the divine. Inside every human breath, and in some quiet way, we are still walking its streets. Every time we listen instead of speak. Every time we touch the earth with reverence. Every time we remember what the world has forgotten. That there were once people who knew how to speak to rivers, who wept at dusk not from sorrow, but from awe, who built with silence, and honored what cannot be named. You may not find Eridu on any map, but it waits for you. In the pause between heartbeats, in the shadow of the moon, in the memory of a star you've never seen. But somehow know, close your eyes, let the dust settle, let the noise fall away, let the silence rise inside you like a tide. And when you feel something lift, not your body, but your remembering, you'll know you have returned to the city that rose, to Eridu, the first city, the last dream, the place that fell, not into ruin, but into the sky,